Mechanic and single dad asks alien waitress why her hands tremble. Her answer leaves him speechless. Jack had been a mechanic for most of his life. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and he loved working with his hands. The greasy, metallic scent of oil and the sound of wrenches clanking had always been comforting to him. But what truly kept him going every day was his son, Ethan. Being a single father wasn't easy, and Jack did everything he could to give Ethan a good life, even if that meant working extra hours or skipping meals to make ends meet. Every day at noon, Jack would take his lunch break at a small diner on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a few tables, a counter with bar stools, and a menu that offered all the diner classics. But it was quiet, and that was exactly what Jack needed. The hustle of the world outside faded away when he stepped into the diner, leaving him with only his thoughts and a warm meal to comfort him. There was one waitress who worked there, Zara, who always caught Jack's attention. She was different from the others. Maybe it was because she wasn't from around here. Zara was an alien, her skin a pale shade of green, and her long hair a shimmering silver that fell down her back like a waterfall. But what really stood out were her eyes, bright purple, deep and otherworldly, as though they held stories no one else could understand. Jack had never been one to pay much attention to the alien patrons in the diner. After all, they were just people like everyone else trying to live their lives. But Zara was different. She never spoke much, always polite but distant. She seemed to carry herself with an air of quiet sorrow, something that Jack couldn't quite place but couldn't ignore either. It wasn't until one afternoon, about a week after Jack first noticed her, that something caught his eye. As Zara served him his usual cheeseburger and fries, he saw it. Her hands were trembling. At first, he thought it was just a slight shiver, but when she placed the food in front of him, the tremors were obvious. Her hands shook as she carefully set the plate down, and Jack could see the strain in her face as she tried to steady herself. Jack frowned, concerned. He had noticed the tremors before, but they had always seemed small, almost unnoticeable. But now, they were impossible to miss. Zara quickly excused herself to go back to the kitchen, but Jack couldn't stop thinking about it. He had seen enough of life's struggles to recognize that kind of pain, even if it was hidden behind a polite smile. The next day, Jack returned to the diner for his lunch break. As always, Zara was there, moving efficiently between the tables, her hands still trembling every now and then. This time, Jack couldn't hold back his curiosity. He caught her eye as she walked past his table and, without thinking, blurted out, "Zara, is everything all right?" Zara paused, surprised by the question. She glanced down at her hands, which were still shaking slightly, and then back at Jack. There was a moment of silence before she gave him a small, tight smile. "It's nothing," she said softly, her voice quiet but warm. "Just a little cold today, I suppose?" Jack wasn't convinced. He knew that kind of answer. He had heard it too many times in his own life. People who didn't want to talk about their problems, people who were too proud or too afraid to admit they were struggling. But Jack had been there before. He wasn't about to let her brush it off. "Zara," he said again, this time more gently, "you don't have to tell me, but if you want to, I'm here." She looked at him for a long moment, her purple eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite understand. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something. But then, she simply nodded and walked away, her steps a little faster than before. The next few days passed without incident. Jack didn't see Zara's trembling hands as often, but when he did, he noticed that it was always after she had a moment to herself, when she thought no one was watching. It was as if she tried to hide it from everyone, including herself. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He knew what it felt like to carry a burden that you couldn't share with anyone, to hide a pain that no one else could see. It was the same kind of feeling he had when he first lost his wife. The same kind of feeling that haunted him every night when he went to bed alone, wondering if he was doing enough for Ethan. A week passed, and Jack found himself returning to the diner every day, not just for the food, but for the quiet moments he could share with Zara. He started to learn the little things about her. How she always wore the same blue apron, how she preferred to drink her coffee black, and how she always seemed to be lost in thought when she wasn't serving customers. There was something about her that Jack couldn't quite place, something that drew him in, even when she seemed so far away. It was on the 8th day when Jack finally decided to ask her again. He was tired of waiting, tired of seeing the tremors in her hands and not doing anything about it. When Zara came to refill his coffee, he caught her arm gently. "Zara, please," he said, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to tell me what's going on, but I can see that something's bothering you. You don't have to go through it alone." Zara's eyes widened, and for a moment she said nothing. Her hands, which had been shaking slightly, grew still. She stared at him for a long time, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Jack could see the hesitation in her eyes, the silent battle she was fighting inside herself. Then slowly she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll tell you, but not here." Jack nodded, understanding. "Whenever you're ready," he said softly. As Zara walked away, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Zara was finally going to share her story, and Jack was going to be there for her, no matter what it took. Zara returned to the diner the next day, but her demeanor was different. She seemed more distant, and Jack could sense that she was still thinking about their conversation. The tremors in her hands, however, were gone. For a brief moment, Jack felt a little relieved, thinking maybe she was feeling better. But as he watched her from across the room, he knew better than to believe it was that simple. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when the diner was quieter, that Zara finally approached his table. Her footsteps were softer than usual, almost hesitant, but she had the same quiet grace she always carried. She stood in front of Jack's table, her purple eyes not meeting his, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Can we talk now?" she asked, her words gentle but filled with a weight Jack could feel. Jack nodded without hesitation. "Of course," he said, making room for her to sit. Zara pulled out the chair across from him and sat down slowly, her posture straight but her hands still fidgeting in her lap. She took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something she had never said aloud before. "I didn't want to talk about it," Zara started, her voice soft. "Not to anyone. I've been running from it for so long that I thought if I ignored it, maybe it would go away." Jack leaned forward slightly, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't speak, letting her words hang in the air between them. He knew that silence sometimes was the best way to show that you were listening. "Where I come from," Zara continued, "we were different, we were strong. My people were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. We didn't need help from anyone. We were self-sufficient, proud, we had everything." She paused, her eyes briefly closing, and Jack could see the pain in her face. "And then it all changed. In one night, everything we built was destroyed." Zara's voice wavered, and Jack's heart tightened. He could feel the heaviness in her words, the fear that still clung to them. He didn't interrupt, didn't push her to explain. He simply let her continue at her own pace. "We were attacked," she said quietly. "Our home planet, our cities, everything was burned to the ground. It wasn't just an invasion, it was a massacre. We were slaughtered by an enemy we never saw coming. The worst part was, there was nothing we could do to stop it. We were too proud, too stubborn to see it until it was too late." Her eyes filled with emotion, and for the first time, Jack saw the full extent of her vulnerability. The alien who had always seemed so composed and distant was now just a woman with a tragic past, one who had been hurt beyond measure. "I was one of the few survivors. I watched everything burn. I watched my family and my people die, and I couldn't do anything to save them. I barely escaped with my life." Zara's voice broke for a moment, and she looked away, wiping her eyes quickly. Jack wanted to reach out, but he didn't. He knew that what she needed most was someone who wouldn't rush her, someone who would just be there without judgment. "I was taken by a human ship," she said after a pause. "They rescued me, brought me here. They treated me like I was just another refugee, but I wasn't just a refugee. I was a survivor. I was supposed to be something more. But instead, I became someone who couldn't even hold a cup without shaking." Jack's heart ached for her, and he could see how deeply the pain had affected her. The woman in front of him had been through more than he could ever imagine, and yet she was still here, still standing. "That's why my hands tremble," Zara continued. "They're not just a physical reaction to fear. They're a reminder that I couldn't save anyone, that I failed." She took another deep breath, her voice growing steadier. "I don't want anyone to see it. I don't want anyone to know how broken I really am, so I hide it. I smile, I serve coffee, I act like everything is fine, but it's not." Jack felt the urge to speak, but he didn't know what to say. What could he say to someone who had lost so much? What words could possibly make that pain go away? Instead, he simply reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, offering her a small, reassuring gesture. She stiffened for a moment but didn't pull away. Slowly, her hand relaxed beneath his, and Jack could feel the tremor in her fingers. It was subtle, but it was there. "You didn't fail," Jack said quietly, his voice sincere. "You survived, that's something, you're still here, and you're not alone anymore." Zara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the truth in his words. For a long moment there was silence between them, and Jack wondered if he had said too much, if he had pushed her too far. But then, to his surprise, she smiled. It was small, almost fragile, but it was there, and it was enough. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack nodded. "You don't have to thank me, I'm just glad you're here." The tremors in Zara's hands didn't disappear right away, but in that moment Jack felt something shift. It wasn't just a small moment of connection between two people. It was a promise. A promise that Zara wasn't alone, that Jack would be there for her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step in her healing. As the afternoon sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting a warm glow on the table between them, Jack and Zara sat together in the quiet, not needing to say anything more. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do for someone wasn't offering solutions, but simply showing up. And for Zara, Jack had shown up. Over the next few days, Jack found himself thinking about Zara constantly. It wasn't just her past that weighed heavily on his mind. It was the quiet strength she carried with her. Despite everything she had been through, she kept going. Every day she put on a smile and did her job, serving the customers with grace and patience, never once allowing her past to show. Jack admired her for that, but it also made him worry. He knew that beneath her calm demeanor, Zara was still hurting. The tremors in her hands hadn't gone away completely, though they were less noticeable. Jack noticed it every time he saw her, even when she tried her best to hide it. But the truth was, Zara wasn't alone anymore. Jack had made sure of that. Each day, Jack made a point to visit the diner, not just for his usual lunch, but to check on Zara. They didn't talk much. Sometimes they just exchanged small words, a smile or a nod. But each moment felt meaningful. Jack didn't want to push her too hard. He understood that healing didn't come in a single conversation. It took time, and he was willing to give her as much time as she needed. One afternoon, as Jack sat at his usual spot by the window, watching the rain fall outside, he couldn't help but notice how different the diner felt. It was quieter than usual. The usual chatter and clinking of cutlery were replaced by an eerie stillness. Zara was at the counter, leaning over a steaming cup of coffee, her shoulders hunched in a way that suggested she was lost in thought. Jack had seen that look on her face before, and he knew it meant something was wrong. He waited a few minutes, hoping she would come over to check on him, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed where she was, her eyes fixed on the window as if she was staring through the glass into another world. Jack felt a pang of concern. This wasn't like her. He stood up, walked over to the counter, and sat down beside her. "Hey, Zara," Jack said softly, his voice warm. "Everything okay?" Zara didn't respond right away. She just continued to stare at the rain outside. Jack waited patiently, not rushing her, knowing that sometimes people needed a little space before they could open up. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said, her words almost lost in the hum of the diner. "I don't know if I can keep pretending." Jack didn't need her to explain. He had seen it in her eyes before, the exhaustion, the quiet desperation that came with carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. "You don't have to pretend, Zara," Jack said gently, his hand resting on the counter beside hers. "You don't have to hide who you are, you're not alone in this." Zara turned to face him, her purple eyes filled with emotion. "I've been pretending for so long," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "It's all I've known. The last time I allowed myself to feel, to show who I really was, it ended in pain. I can't go through that again." Jack's heart ached for her. He could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of opening up to someone and getting hurt again. It was a fear he understood all too well. He had been there himself after the loss of his wife, when he thought he would never be able to trust anyone again. But he had learned that trust wasn't about never being hurt. It was about finding someone who would stand by you when you needed it the most. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened," Jack said quietly. "But you don't have to carry it alone. I'm here, Zara. And I'll be here no matter what." Zara took a shaky breath, her eyes looking down at her hands. The tremors were back, subtle but still there. She clenched her fists, trying to stop them from shaking, but the effort only made it worse. Jack could see the strain in her face as she tried to control it. She didn't want him to see her weakness. She didn't want anyone to see it. Jack's hand moved slowly, reaching out to cover hers. At first, Zara flinched, but then she let her hand rest in his. The tremors slowed, and for the first time in a long while, Zara allowed herself to relax just for a moment. "You don't have to hide, Zara," Jack repeated softly. "It's okay to let go." Zara looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. "But what if I can't let go? What if I'm broken beyond repair?" Jack shook his head gently. "You're not broken, you're just hurt, and hurt can heal. It takes time, but it heals." Zara swallowed hard, a tear slipping down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. She wasn't used to showing her emotions, and for a moment she seemed embarrassed by her vulnerability. But Jack didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply gave her the space to feel whatever she needed to feel. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The rain continued to fall outside, tapping against the windows in a soothing rhythm. Jack remained by her side, offering his quiet presence, knowing that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone wasn't to give them advice or try to fix their problems. Sometimes it was just being there. Eventually, Zara spoke again, her voice softer now, more certain. "I don't know if I'm ready to let go, but maybe I can start trying, one step at a time." Jack smiled, his heart lightening at her words. "That's all any of us can do. Take it one step at a time." As the hours passed, Jack and Zara continued to talk, but not about the past. They talked about everything and nothing, about the weather, about the customers who came and went, about the little things that made life feel normal again. For the first time in a long while, Zara felt like she could breathe. She didn't have to carry her pain alone anymore. By the time Jack finished his meal, the diner was closing for the night. Zara began to clear the table, her movements more fluid than before, less stiff. The tremors in her hands had lessened, and her shoulders seemed a little lighter. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. A start toward healing, toward moving forward. "Thank you, Jack," Zara said as she walked him to the door, her voice quieter now but filled with warmth. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Jack smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. You're not alone, Zara. You never will be." And as Jack stepped out into the night, the rain had stopped. The world was quieter, and Zara, for the first time in a long while, felt like she was no longer carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The next few weeks passed with a quiet but steady change. Zara began to open up more, not just to Jack, but to others as well. It wasn't easy for her. Trust was something she had lost a long time ago. But with Jack's steady presence, she started to feel a little lighter, a little less burdened by the past. Each day felt like a small victory, and though her hands still trembled from time to time, they no longer shook with the same intensity. It was as if the weight she had carried for so long was slowly starting to lift, piece by piece. Jack noticed the changes in her, and it made him smile. He didn't think she realized it, but there were moments when she would catch his gaze and smile back, and it was a real smile. Not the kind of polite smile she had given to customers before, but one that reached her eyes. It was small, but it meant something. One evening after the diner had closed, Zara sat down at the counter with Jack. The last few customers had left, and the lights were dimmed, casting a soft glow over the empty room. Jack had stayed later than usual just to chat with Zara. It had become a routine of sorts, the time they spent together in the quiet after the diner's busy hours. "I've been thinking," Zara said, her voice more confident now, though still gentle. "About what you said, about moving forward. I think I'm ready to try." Jack turned to face her, his heart lifting at her words. "What do you mean?" Zara looked down at her hands, which rested on the counter. For the first time in a long while, they were still calm. She seemed to gather her thoughts before speaking again. "I've spent so much time being afraid of what happened to me," she said quietly. "Afraid that if I let go of the past, it would somehow erase who I am. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to start over. I want to find a way to live without always looking over my shoulder." Jack listened closely, his eyes soft with understanding. He knew what it was like to feel trapped by the past, to feel like you could never move on. He had seen that same fear in his own eyes when he had lost his wife, when he had wondered if he would ever be able to move on and give Ethan the life he deserved. But slowly, with time, he had come to realize that the past didn't have to define him. And it didn't have to define Zara either. "You're stronger than you know," Jack said, his voice steady and kind. "You've already taken the hardest step by facing it. The rest, it'll come one step at a time." Zara smiled at him, her expression full of gratitude. "I don't know if I would have been able to face it without you," she said softly. "I've been so scared of letting anyone get close, but you You made me realize that I don't have to do this alone. Jack reached across the counter and placed his hand over hers, a simple gesture, but one that meant everything. You're not alone, Zara. Not now, not ever. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, sitting in the quiet diner, sharing a moment of understanding. It was strange how the simplest things could feel so powerful. Jack had spent so many years trying to keep his distance from people, afraid of getting hurt. But with Zara, it was different. There was no fear, only the feeling that they understood each other in a way no one else did. As the days went on, Zara's transformation became even more apparent. She began to laugh more, to talk more, and even when her hands shook occasionally, it no longer felt like something that defined her. It was just a small part of who she was, not the whole. She had started to rebuild herself brick by brick, and though it wasn't perfect, it was enough. It was enough because she had Jack and Jack had her. They were no longer two strangers passing each other by. They were two people who had found something meaningful in each other's presence. One night, as Jack was getting ready to leave, Zara pulled him aside. Her eyes were filled with something Jack hadn't seen before, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something like hope. "Jack," she began, her voice a little shakier than usual but still strong. "I've been thinking. I know I'm not fully healed. And I know I still have a long way to go, but I want to thank you for everything." Jack shook his head, smiling warmly. "You don't have to thank me, Zara. I'm just glad I could be here for you." Zara's eyes softened, and for a moment Jack could see the walls she had built around herself slowly coming down. "No," she said quietly. "I want to thank you. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever. You made me believe that I could move on, that I could find peace again. I'll never forget that." Jack felt a lump in his throat as he listened to her words. They weren't just words, they were the kind of words that came from the heart, the kind of words that made everything Jack had done feel worth it. "Zara," he said gently, "you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be you, and that's more than enough." Zara smiled at him, her purple eyes shimmering with emotion. "You make it sound so simple," she said softly, "but maybe it is. Maybe I've been making it harder than it needs to be." Jack's smile widened. "It's not always easy, but it's worth it. And I'll be here every step of the way." For the first time in what felt like a long time, Zara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't fixed, she wasn't healed, but she was moving forward, and that, she realized, was all that mattered. As Jack left the diner that night, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had helped someone find their way. But more than that, he had found something, too. He had found a friendship, a connection that had made both of their lives a little better, a little brighter. And for that, he was thankful. The days grew warmer as the seasons slowly changed, and with each passing week, Jack and Zara grew closer. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always perfect. Zara still had moments where the memories of her past would come flooding back, where the tremors would return, but each time, she learned how to cope a little better. And each time, Jack was there to remind her that it was okay to be broken, that it was okay to have scars, but that she didn't have to carry them alone. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the diner, Jack noticed that Zara seemed different. There was a calmness about her, a confidence that hadn't been there before. She was still the same woman, quiet, thoughtful, with that gentle smile, but there was something new in her eyes. It was the same look Jack had seen in his own reflection when he realized that, after all the pain and loss, he had finally started to heal. Zara caught his gaze across the room, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. It was as if the silence between them spoke louder than words ever could. Then she walked over to him, her steps more assured than they had been months ago. "Hey," she said softly, her voice steady. "Can we talk?" Jack smiled and nodded, motioning for her to sit next to him. The diner was quiet, with only a few customers lingering, and the air between them felt peaceful. There was no rush, no pressure. It was just the two of them sharing a quiet moment together. Zara sat down beside him, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Jack noticed that they were still, no tremors, no signs of tension. She looked at him, her purple eyes reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice thoughtful but strong, "about everything that's happened, about how far I've come. I didn't think I could ever get here, Jack. I didn't think I'd ever be able to live without constantly looking over my shoulder, but I'm starting to realize that maybe I don't need to anymore." Jack listened intently, a warmth spreading through him as he watched her speak. Her words weren't just words. They were the evidence of her journey, the proof that she had begun to rebuild her life piece by piece. I used to think that I had to bury everything, that I had to hide from it all, but now I see that I can face it. I can remember the past without letting it control me, and I can move forward. I'm still scared, but I'm not running anymore. Jack's heart swelled with pride for her. He had seen the struggles she had gone through, the way she had fought against the pain, and now, to hear her speak like this, it was clear that Zara had made a choice. She had chosen to stop being a victim of her past and to start living her life in the present. "I'm glad you're here, Zara," Jack said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "I'm glad you're not running anymore. You've come so far, and I'm proud of you." Zara smiled softly at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jack. You made me believe I could. I spent so much time thinking I wasn't worth it, that I wasn't strong enough, but you showed me that I was. And I've never been more grateful for that." Jack's smile grew, and for a moment he felt something deep inside him shift. It wasn't just the satisfaction of knowing he had helped someone. It was the realization that Zara had helped him too. She had helped him remember that even after loss, after pain, there was still beauty in life. There was still hope, still the possibility for something good. "Zara," Jack said, his voice steady, "you've always been strong. You just needed to see it yourself." Zara's smile widened, and for the first time, Jack saw something truly radiant in her. It wasn't just the relief of healing, it was something deeper, something powerful. She had found herself again. She had rediscovered who she was, and in doing so, she had begun to rebuild her future. "I've been thinking about something else too," Zara said, her tone shifting slightly. "About what comes next." Jack raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" Zara hesitated for a moment before speaking, her eyes soft but determined. "I want to go back to school. I want to finish what I started before all of this happened. I want to be able to look at my future and know that I'm doing something that matters. Something for me, not just for survival." Jack was taken aback for a moment, but then the smile came naturally to his face. He could see the determination in her eyes, and he knew that this was something she had been thinking about for a long time. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about living, about making her life her own. "I think that's a great idea, Zara," Jack said, his voice full of support. "You deserve to do what makes you happy, to build the future you want. And I'll be here every step of the way to help you with whatever you need." Zara's eyes softened with gratitude, and for a moment they just sat in silence, content with the understanding that passed between them. It wasn't just about the words they said, it was about the promise they had made to each other, the promise of support, of friendship, and of healing. As the night wore on, the diner began to empty out, and Jack stood up, ready to leave. He turned to Zara, who was still sitting at the counter, her hands now resting calmly on the surface. "I'll see you tomorrow?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. Zara nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Yeah, see you tomorrow, Jack." And as Jack stepped out into the cool night air, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. He had helped someone find their way, but more than that, he had helped himself rediscover the importance of connection, of standing by someone when they needed it the most. And in the quiet of the evening, he knew that both he and Zara were on their way to brighter, better days.